I want to welcome you back to Wake Up with WURD, and now I want to share my conversation with Jillian Pertell. She is the executive director of the Marian Anderson Museum. Let's take a listen.
The house was built in 1857, and we have had painstaking work put in to trying to get the detail just right to where Marian Anderson had this beautiful edifice, this sacred space, this wonderful place that housed not only Marian Anderson and her great family, but Marian Anderson's wonderful friends and music contemporaries, Duke Ellington, Cab Calloway, Count Basie, Ella Fitzgerald, Lena Horne, Louis Armstrong. So many wonderful people, our people, who when they performed here in Philadelphia, because of Jim Crow, couldn't get open table seating in the restaurants in Philadelphia, in Center City proper, couldn't get hotel rooms. Marian Anderson took care of them here.
Describe to us what this house would have been like when Marian Anderson was here.
Well, that's a dichotomy between a peaceful place, a sanctuary, a sacred space where her family could dwell and she could be at peace and go over her music and really commune with that. Then this joyous jumping. It was a place where her friends, the community, neighbors would come in and they would enjoy music, they would enjoy laughter, they would enjoy food and each other. And that was the environment, that was the spirit that lived here at 762 South Martin Street and for Marian Anderson and her family. And I can tell you, pre the flood, when people would come in and they would visit the museum, they would always say they feel Marian's spirit in this house. They feel Marian Anderson's spirit. And that's saying something. You can't go into Old City, Philadelphia, to the historic district, to Declaration of Independence Signers Hall and say, oh, I feel the spirit of our founding fathers. You don't get that. But when you walk into the Marian Anderson Museum, you feel Marian Anderson's spirit.
How did she develop this incredible virtuoso talent for music?
Well, her parents said when she was born, February 27th, 1897, she came into the world with a shout. So they knew that she had lungs on her and that she was going to do something with that marvelous voice. At the age of 6 years old, she started singing on the choir at the historic Union Baptist Church across the street. She had a vocal range, even at that tender age, going from soprano to tenor. And the choir master said he was going to fill her in wherever he could because that voice was just so strong and powerful. And as she developed as a child and a teenager into a young person, that love for music continued. She was singing in pageants at the time. She was singing in early recitals for not only those that she started herself because she didn't have that much support, but those that were put on by the church. Mr. Roland Hayes, formidable African-American tenor, who noticed her voice at one of the church concerts, and also at the time, the founder of the Philadelphia Tribune newspaper. He cared a great deal about Marian Anderson, and he would often put writings in the newspaper telling people about her voice and then helping her advertise her concerts. You know, that community building, that faith and strength of each other in the community that doesn't seem to exist too much anymore, existed here in Philadelphia, in this community, in this area, one to another to try to help each other along. She had suffered so many setbacks and so many issues because of the color of her skin. And it's sad, but she endured it. And she says she endured it so that people who were coming behind her wouldn't have to endure the same.
Of course, this is a historically black community. This was where the black community in Philadelphia lived and thrived and worked together. Talk about the importance of this community in the development of Marian Anderson.
The community was so important and intricate to Marian Anderson at the time because her family didn't have the funds to foresee her dream coming to fruition. When her dad died from a blow to the head while he was working at the Reading terminal, the family was left crippled. They had to move in with her grandmother, Isabella, and grandfather, Benjamin, at 16th and Fitzwater. Her mother, who was a teacher and a fine one in West Virginia, when she came to Philadelphia and married Marian Anderson's father, John, they told her she couldn't become a teacher. It was a race issue from the Great Migration. They wouldn't let people who had those type of jobs that were black in the South do that here in the North, even in Philadelphia. So she settled for a job at the Wanamaker department store being a cleaning woman. And Marian Anderson felt that she had to do whatever she could to help the family because she was the oldest child. So she would go to school, but she would also start scrubbing steps for change. She would take in laundry. She would do sewing, anything she could do to help her mother and her family. And the community came to Marian Anderson's aid because when she was a senior in high school, South Philadelphia High School for girls at the time, her principal introduced her to Mr. Giuseppe Boghetti, who was an incredible vocal coach, and he took students to far places. But he was very expensive. He was $50 a month. That kind of money during, 1900 and the early 19-teens, they didn't have that. It was so expensive. But the community came together for Marian Anderson. They had church concerts, bake sales. The YWCA had craft sales, bazaars, quilting sessions. They raised the money to get Marian Anderson the vocal lessons that she needed with Mr. Giuseppe Boghetti consistently for 3 years until Marian Anderson was able to afford it on her own. The community cared that much about a young person, a young black person, wanting to see them succeed, that they gave of themselves to help her and her family do just that.
But because she was black, there were some things that she endured as she was rising to the level that she got to. What were some of those things?
Well, number one, when she would travel, even in the local area or across the country to try to sing an early concert recitaling so she could raise the money to purchase this house and she could move out of her grandparents' house. They couldn't, she and her mother, when she traveled with her, couldn't sit in the train car. They had to sit in the back where the engine was and all of the soot and everything would get on them in their little seat and compartment because they couldn't sit in the middle or the front of the car with everybody else. They couldn't eat in the club car. Her mother packed 2 sandwiches for them and some oranges and some nuts. That's all they had the entire trip, going and coming. The things she endured by not being able to ride the streetcar in Philadelphia, going back and forth. She had to walk. Then she had to be worried about walking at night because she didn't want to be attacked, which happened a lot to us in Philadelphia at the time. Marian Anderson came back from all of those early tour experiences in the United States and in the tri-state area. She was able to raise, with the help of Mr. William Billy King, her accompanist and manager at the time, $4,000 to buy this house. She paid in cash $4,000, young black woman, at City Hall. That's where you got your deed from and you paid for your property then. And she wanted to go to school because she saw all the other young women in the community and in the part of this area of Philadelphia who weren't black going to college and studying what they wanted to do. She wanted to do the same. She tried to apply for the Philadelphia Academy of Music and Art, now the University of the Arts. They told her when she tried to hand in her application that they would never ever accept any colored people to that university. That broke her. Marian Anderson was a strong person. She was a quiet person, but she was strong. But when she was told by that institution of higher learning they weren't ever going to have blacks there, she was crushed because she felt, I'm just the same inside as this white young lady who's giving you this application, but you're taking her and you're not taking me or anybody who looks like me. But her mother told her to keep the faith and not lose heart. These are just some small examples. And I thank God for Marian Anderson and her walk and the way she carried herself in her life story. Because of what she suffered and what she went through, over 80 years later, I walked out of that university the University of the Arts with my degrees. Because of her sacrifice, because of all she fought for to get young ladies like myself and others the right to study there and to graduate from there. These are things that can break a person down to their knees. But though she was hurt, though she was tired, though she was pressed, she kept going so that she could try to fight for the rights for others to do better and have more, even though it was denied to her. Marian Anderson always cared more about others than she cared about herself.
We're talking with Jillian Pertell. She's the executive director of the Marian Anderson Museum. And we're here in South Philly at 762 Martin Street, that house that you referred to that she bought with really the sweat of her brow, $4,000 at the time, had to be an astronomical amount of money. Let's talk about some of the things that she succeeded in. So she gets that rejection, it breaks her down. Where does she go from there?
So her vocal coach, Giuseppe Boghetti, said, you know what, it's not the end. They don't want you, that's fine. There was a foundation all the way in Washington State, across the country on the West Coast, who had musical talent applications being sent out because they wanted young artists and they wanted to see how they could develop them and send them over for vocal training and also experience in Europe. Because Europe was having a big music boom then, as you know, not only for the classical scene, but for the jazz scene, you know, and everything else. It was like a beautiful renaissance that was happening in Europe, even though there was a big one happening in Harlem. She was a part of all of that. And I know that sometimes people can look at classical music and think it's too highbrow. It's not for black people. We're not a part of that culture. We are a part of that culture. We enhance that culture, okay? And we were a part of that culture decades ago. And if you look back into the classical history of the time, black people were composing and writing in the 1700s, just like Mozart's and the others. So it's a lot to take in, but she applied for that scholarship and she received it. And the foundation in Washington State sent her the money so that Mr. Boghetti could send her to Europe. And though the family was nervous and Marian Anderson was nervous, the fall of 1928, she boarded the Queen Mary ship and she set sail for Europe, landed in London, and she had her first tour of an educational European experience, classical experience. She sat with the classical masters of the day. She would eventually learn and master 6 languages. Marian Anderson, who had started off paying for her own concerts in Europe with the help of the United States ambassadors, Mr. and Mrs. Innenwald, who were her shadows at the time, make sure that as an American citizen, nothing happened to her. After those first few concerts, the word got out about this young, black, tall, beautiful voice who was over here in Europe, singing in London, singing in Paris, singing in Rome, and Prague and Gstaad and all of that. And she became a sensation over there. This chocolate-skinned, beautiful black woman who could sing in a low register, sing in a high register. They thought she was a chameleon, and they came in droves to see her, and her name got out. Between 1929 up until 1938, Marian Anderson accrued so much money before coming back to the United States for the 3rd time after those European tours and educational experience, that she was noted as being the highest paid African American artist in the United States from South Philadelphia. From little to nothing but community support. And that's what she came into. And then was still the highest paid African American artist up and until the late 1940s.
That's incredible. That's incredible. So in the time we have left, I want to talk about how she got to the Lincoln Memorial. and what the journey was to that, because there was some controversy involved in that. What happened?
So at the end of 1938, Sal Hurok, her manager and impresario, Mr. Bogetti, brought her back to the United States and said, "You've had your wonderful tours in Europe. We want to introduce you again to America as the people's princess in music. We want to have a concert where the East can meet the West," because they had a contract with Howard University that they were going to have a big concert with Marian Anderson. And it was supposed to be scheduled at Constitution Hall, where they would regularly in that area have concerts, not necessarily Howard University, but other people. But little did everyone know that Constitution Hall was owned by the Daughters of the American Revolution organization, and they had a strict policy of no blacks ever performing on that stage at all. So by the time her management found out, it was a total non-starter. They weren't having her. Because initially, they had accepted the contract because they thought Anderson was a white name. But when they found out that she was black, they weren't having it. Meanwhile, Marian Anderson knew nothing about it because she was on the West Coast in California giving concerts and performing. And the first she heard of it was a reporter saying, "Well, what do you think about the fact that you've been denied the right to sing at Constitution Hall?" She was shocked. She didn't know. But she said, "If you could refer that comment to my management, but I feel that it's a sad thing to deny anybody who has a talent the right to be somewhere, and hopefully we can work it out." Marian Anderson at that point believed that it was just something that wasn't going to happen, and another disappointment in her own home country. But she had help. The president of the National NAACP, Mr. Walter White, who had been a confidant of Marian Anderson's when he saw her perform years ago here in Philadelphia. Then it was First Lady of the United States, Eleanor Roosevelt, who people give very little credit to, but she was a strong woman and force for change before it was what people considered the thing to do. And her blog at the time was a newspaper she put out twice a month that would tell people about how she felt about the order of the day of things. And when she found out about this, she said, "I can't be a part of an organization that would do anything like that to anyone." So she was an honorary member of the DAR. They gave her this honorary membership. And she says, "I'm going to send you all a Western Union letter and let you know I'm giving back my honorary membership. If this is how you are going to do this young lady who is beyond talented and strong and full of grace," those are the words she used, "then shame on you. And we will find another way." And so with the help of Mr. Walter White, Mr. Harold Ickes, the United States Department of the Interior conservator, they decided they were going to have a concert for everybody, where everybody could come and be welcome in front of God's space, they called it, which was the open sky at the Lincoln Memorial on Easter Sunday, April 9th, 1939. And everybody came. 75,000 people packed that space to hear Marian Anderson give the concert of a lifetime that she was scared to give, because that was so much pressure. It wasn't just a concert anymore. She was an ambassador and a symbol of her people, and it was going to be known all over. Millions of people were listening on the radio. You had artists and boxers, Jack Johnson, you had Tallulah Bankhead, all those people were there listening, politicians. And her people in the front row, her family, people who cared and loved for her. But at the end of it, when it was all over and she opened her eyes, because she sang with her eyes closed sometimes, she looked up and she wasn't just a successful artist anymore. She was a symbol transcendent, someone who Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King called the original mother of the civil rights movement. And he just didn't make hay of that. He was there that day with his parents. Tears came down his eyes when she sang.
And that is Jillian Purtell talking about Marian Anderson. Of course, you can support the work of the Marian Anderson Museum right here in Philadelphia. You just simply have to go to their website. I put the information in the Facebook feed so you can check it out there. We're going to go to break. On the other side, we are going to continue the show. I am Solomon Jones. This is WURD Radio. We'll be right back.
Stay connected on the go with the new and improved WURD Radio app. Sir